I'm here today to start telling you about the 1873 to 1875 awakening, which is often known as the D.L. Moody revival. But I am not sure that that is a correct title because I believe God was moving on this land before Moody arrived. There was definitely an awakening going on in the south of England and in the north of England, and then later in Nottingham, and uh, widespread revival across Western Cornwall. And and William Booth was moving powerfully in London. So I believe the awakening had begun when before Moody arrived. Now, an evangelist does not start a revival. I mean, history shows that it's God who is preparing the revival. He hovers over the nation, and then the evangelist comes in as his messenger to light the fire that God has been preparing. And I believe that that is what has happened here in England at that time. I believe that pastors do not really recognize the times and seasons that they're in. But the evangelists, by their very nature, going around the country, they tap into what God's doing and they light the fires wherever God has prepared them. So for those of you who have seen me a lot, you will recognize the fact that I'm in a studio, and I'm not normally in a studio. I'm normally out around the country, around the UK, filming in the different places where the people lived or where the revivals, awakenings took place. But as I am starting this by talking about the life of D.L. Moody, I really don't want to go to America to have to do that. So I've decided to do it here in a studio. Dwight Lyman Moody was born in 1837 in Northfield, Massachusetts, to a Unitarian family. And he wasn't really happy there as in the countryside. He wanted to make a fortune and to be in a vibrant town or city. And so he suddenly, when he was 17, got up and went to Boston, where he got a job in his uncle's shoe company. And Moody was a very charismatic personality. He had a business mind as well, and he had incredible energy. So being a salesman was something he just excelled at. And his uncle insisted, though, that he join a church and a Sunday school as condition of employment. So um, Moody did this, and he joined a Sunday school. And one day, his teacher, when he thought the time was right, went to see Moody and told him that Jesus loved him and what Jesus expected in return. And that was it for Moody. He understood and he became born again there and then. But after 2 years, he wanted more, and he'd heard about this exciting new city of Chicago, and he thought he could make more money there. So he moved there, and he immediately joined in a revival that was going on there. This was the Jeremiah Lanphier revival, which was a huge revival that went across America at that time, with over 1 million people giving their lives to the Lord. And this was his first revival, but it wouldn't be his last by any means. In Chicago, he joined a shoe company again, and it was their itinerant salesman, and he did really well there. And he joined a church, and he went to a mission school wanting to teach a class. But he was told that they had too many teachers, and the only way he could have a class was if he brought his own children to the school. And next Sunday, Moody brought in 18 hoodlums, little hoodlums, into the school and began a class. And this shows his gifting, and which one will see more of as I tell the story. But people just gathered around him. Uh, he was an amazing personality. So he started this school, and he started this class, and that went on for a while. And then he wanted to start his own school somewhere in a different district of Chicago. So he found somewhere and he started his own school. And in no time, he had 600 children and adults at this school. Um, Amazing number, really. In 1860, Moody realized that the work he was doing was really prospering. He could gather together 1,500 people on a Sunday, a huge number. And but he realized that although there were all these people there, they weren't saved. But this was all to change. There was a class in the school of young girls who Moody knew were incredibly badly behaved. And one day that their teacher came to him with looking incredibly sad. And he told him that he had a lung disease. He'd just been told by the doctor, and that he was going to die, and that he couldn't stay in Chicago because of the climate there. And so he had to go. But he was really mainly sad and upset because he realized that in all the years of teaching children in the school, uh, he'd never led any of them to Jesus. So Moody said to him, well, look, let's go and visit these children, these girls, one by one, and you can speak to them. So they went to the first house, and the teacher spoke to the girl about Jesus, and tears started to well up in her eyes. And they decided to pray for her. So he and Moody, uh, they hadn't done anything like this before, had prayed for her, and she gave her life to the Lord. They then went to other houses, and the same thing happened. Each one they visited, the young girl gave her life to Jesus. And then after 10 days, the teacher came to Moody, and his face was shining, and he gleefully told him that the last girl had given her life to the Lord. So his whole class was now saved. Moody wrote about this. He says, he had to leave the next night, so I called his class together that night for a prayer meeting, and there God kindled a fire in my soul that has never gone out. The height of my ambition had been to be a successful merchant, and if I'd known that meeting was going to take that ambition out of me, I might not have gone. But how many times I have thanked God since for that meeting. The dying teacher sat in the midst of his class and talked with them and read the 14th chapter of John. We knelt to pray, and as I was just rising from my knees, when one of the class began to pray for her dying teacher, another prayed, and another, and before we rose, the whole class had prayed. The next evening, he was leaving by train, and Moody went to the station to see him off. And without anything arranged, the girls came one by one to say goodbye to their teacher. And the last they saw of him was he was leaning out of the carriage with his finger pointed to heaven, indicating that the next time that they would meet him would be in heaven. An amazing story, I think, and no wonder that Moody Moody's life was changed by that. So Moody put aside his desire to make a fortune and went into full-time ministry. Soon after this, in 1861, the American Civil War began. And he would not fight because he couldn't kill anybody. So he decided to set up with a couple of friends a committee under the auspices of the Young Men's Christian Association, the YMCA, that he'd been attached to since 1854 and which was to be an important part of his life for the rest of his life. And this committee was set up in order to put on um, services for the military men, the servicemen. And to begin with, they were in a camp of Union soldiers who were being trained and who were coming through Chicago, going to the front line. But then, when they had all gone to the front line, they were replaced by Confederate um, prisoners. And they carried on doing services for these prisoners. And throughout the war, it didn't make any difference to them whether they were Confederate or Union. They ministered to both. And on one occasion, he came with a friend to do the service, and the presence of God just fell powerfully in the meeting, and a revival began. And this went on for 2 or 3 weeks, with many of the Confederate soldiers being saved. Moody would go to the front many times. The whole point of this committee was to do services for the soldiers, to hand out Bibles, to visit the sick, to visit prisons. They were fully occupied for the 4 years of the war. And then at the end of the war in 1865, Moody went back to his work with the Sunday school. And people began to want to know why he was so successful. He had some interesting ways of bringing in the children. He would offer inducements like sweets or fruit to bring them in. And there was this magnetic personality that he had. But so many people came to find out um, about his gospel preaching and to find out why the school was so successful that he started to do conferences, and thousands of people came to these conferences. And then the Illinois state started to back him, and he would then go to different states putting on conferences. So he became really quite well known, and he was extremely successful in what he was doing. It was at this time that Moody began the noon prayer meeting, and this became extremely important to his ministry and to uh, to England and the UK in future years. Moody was an evangelist through and through. You could see him on the streets, stopping passers-by, trying to get them to come to the daily noon prayer meeting. And in the summer, you would see him on the streets every night preaching the gospel. As I said before, he had incredible energy. In 1867, he decided that he wanted to come to England to uh, meet or to learn from some of the great orators that we had here, like Spurgeon. So when he arrived, he went to the headquarters of the YMCA in Aldersgate Street in London, and he taught them his methods of preaching the gospel, and he started a noon prayer meeting, which just took off in England and went all over the place. And in the 3 months that he was here, He met a lot of people. He taught them about his gospel methods, and he really became quite popular and well known. On returning to Chicago, he carried on at his school with his ministry. And then in 1870, he met Ira Sankey. Now, he had heard Ira Sankey sing once at a meeting, and Ira came to introduce himself to Moody, and Moody immediately said to him, "I need you in my ministry. Will you come to Chicago?" Because Sankey was a gospel singer, and Moody felt that that the two of them would really get on well together. But Sankey wasn't sure. But he went the next day to an open air meeting that Moody was holding to hear Moody speak. And he wrote, "The address that evening was one as powerful as I have ever heard. The crowd stood spellbound at the burning words, and many a tear was brushed away from the eyes of the men as they looked up into the speaker's honest face." So Sankey was sold, and a few months later, he joined Moody um, in Chicago. In 1871, Moody did a series of talks in his school uh, about the leading characters of the Bible. Now, it was the summer months. People didn't tend to come to church as much in the summer, and so he did this to try to attract them. And he attracted thousands. He had the biggest congregation he'd ever had. And he spent these about 10 weeks going through the different uh, leading characters of the Bible. But he rested on Jesus for, I think, 5 weeks. And then on the penultimate Sunday, he said to people, "Right, you've heard me preach all these Sundays. Now go home and consider what I've said and consider about the state of your soul and come back next Sunday ready to take action." And the problem was that during that week, there was the Great Chicago Fire, and that congregation never ever met again. And this changed Moody's life because Moody was about to lead all these people, many of these people, to the Lord, but he was not to see them again. And so from that moment, he decided that he had to, when he preached, bring people to a place there and then to make a decision for Christ or not. And he did this for the rest of his life. And this was quite an unusual and quite with some people, this was a difficult thing to believe. And it was to cause some controversy in later years. But it was something that also William Booth was doing at around the same time. Then something else happened that was to change his life as well. He was um, sitting in, he was preaching, and there were these two ladies in the congregation, and he kept seeing them praying while he was preaching, and he couldn't figure this out at all. So he asked them one day, why are you praying?" They said, "We're praying for you." And he said, "Why?" He said, "We're praying for you to receive power." And that puzzled Moody because he thought he had power. He led people to the Lord all the time. And he thought about this over the coming days. And then he called them in to see him one day to ask them more about what they meant. And they said, "We want you to be filled with Holy Spirit." And as they said this, a hunger burned inside him, um, something that made him really want to have this Holy Spirit inside him. And over the coming days, he kept praying, asking God to fill him, fill me, fill me, fill me. And then finally, when he was in New York, he had this encounter with God, and he got filled with the Spirit. And he wrote, "I can only say that God revealed himself to me, and I had such an experience of his love that I had to ask him to stay his hand." That is so similar to the many testimonies that I have read about people receiving the baptism of fire. And those of you who are familiar with what I do know that I talk about the baptism of fire all the time. His preaching didn't change, but the results changed, and many, many more gave their lives to Jesus through his ministry. And then he decided that he would make a short trip to England again, and not to minister, just to learn. So he arrived in England and went to a few conferences. And then somebody, a minister from North London, asked him if he would minister one Sunday in his church. And obviously, something nudged him to change his plans, and he agreed. So he went to the church, congregational church, and he preached in the morning, and it was dead. And he thought, why have I come here? And then there was the evening service at 6:30, and during that service, the Spirit of God came down, that he felt that the very air in the church was charged with the Spirit of God. And he, at the end of his preaching, he asked people to stand up if they wanted to give their lives to Jesus, and nearly the whole room stood up, the whole church. So he took some of them off to what they call the inquiry room, where they could talk to the people about the state of their souls, and several gave their lives to the Lord. And both he and the minister were rather amazed. They had not been expecting this at all. And so the next day, Moody went off to Dublin, which he had planned to do. But on the Tuesday, he got a telegram from the minister saying, "Please come back." There were more people inquiring about the Lord on Monday than there were on Sunday. So Moody went back, and he stayed for 10 days, and 400 people were added to the church. And this was really, I guess, his first really successful awakening that he had been part of. So he returned home, and on that trip, he had met a lot of people. And when he got home, he had invitations from three pastors in England asking him to come back to actually minister this time. And one of them was the very well-known Penny Father, who was evidently an incredibly godly and wonderful man. He started the Mildmay conferences, and these three ministers said that they would make sure that all his expenses for he and his for the people with him would be paid for. So Moody decided to come, and he asked extremely famous gospel singer Philip Phillips to come with him, but he couldn't. And then he asked another gospel singer, Bliss, and he couldn't come. So he decided to take Ira Sankey. His original plan was for Sankey to look after the ministry in Chicago while he was away, but he decided to take him. And so Sankey and his family and Moody and his wife and children, they planned to come to England. And he waited for the money to buy the tickets for the boat, but no money came. So he decided he had to buy the tickets with his savings. It took up all his savings, and they took the boat for England.